Today's video is about a lesson I found about how to paint trees. I'll put the link, as always, in the title or in the description below the video. So if you want to just link to the original, you can do that. And I'll talk about it for a minute. But this is it. We're just doing a video that's describing how to do these different trees. Skip if you want to get right into it. It's a long video, I apologize, but there's, whatever we have here, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish different trees. So I did all of them. I would skip around if I were you. And like, oh, I want to, so it starts here. I'll help. It starts here, goes in this direction, and then, so I'm not high-tech enough yet to start giving you the actual, at 1 minute and 45 seconds, you'll be painting this tree, right? Not yet. Don't know if I'm ever going to get there. That might be a little too edited, published, and all that kind of good stuff for me. Polished, because, whatever. All right. So that's what we're doing. 2 seconds and something else. If you have any suggestions for other things to have me show you or go out and try and put it on the channel, let me know, because I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and what you want to see. I'm still doing things like this, this is something I learned as a specific skill, and then I still do paintings as well, and I show both. If you'd like more of the paintings or more of the specific skills, let me know, because there's all kinds of stuff out there to find, and I keep finding it. All right, beyond that, there'll be nothing at the end. What did I figure out about this? This was a great lesson. Now I have at least some concept of how to paint trees. As I'm finding in a lot of these things, the person who does the video is professional and has been doing it for years. So it's kind of like, riding a bike to them. They know how to do it without thinking. The rest of us, like mortals, yeah, we have to work a little harder. So that's one of the reasons why there's multiple versions of this. And even these, which I think are okay, don't match the same level of panache that the person who did the original one does. And that's because they've been painting for years and years. And they've done 10,000 trees. So to them it's, it's easy. All right, so get into it. It was really fun to do. I want to do more of this. See you guys. Okay. So I'm trying a new technique for painting trees, which I've never done. Learned it online. Of course, the link will be in the description. Yeah, and it's essentially painting the trunk. I made a couple of different washes to begin with, colors. Painting the trunk and then using the end of a brush, wooden handle, that I've sharpened and then dulled the edge, just the point just a little bit. So let's give it a go. This is without any practice. So starting with that, get a lot of paint in there. So the first thing I'm seeing is maybe my point is a little too much, because when I go straight down it doesn't pull out much, but when I use the side I get this nice effect. Now using a finer brush, just a few added, like little twigs. Keep it light and moving quickly. So for the next part, we're going to take the brush and hold it flat. And we're trying to, here, I needed to practice a little bit ahead of time. So I've got a dull green and I'm just running, I just want to get the texture of the paper. right? So and a couple of dollops wet to get that to now I'm seeing immediately that I messed up because I didn't let the first part dry. Didn't say that in the video. So let's let this dry and come back. So you might notice I made another, when I'm thinking heavier pigment. Obviously I've changed the mix a little bit, and this is again a heavy pigment with a fairly dry brush, right? And I just want to pick up some of this. Let's try this again because these are now dry. And it's really keeping it very horizontal, which is hard for me to do. Okay. A couple of moments of just some relatively clean water. So now the point is to do the same thing with a more vibrant green. Practicing a little bit, because this is all new to me. That's too wet, obviously. Not quite achieving the texture I'm looking for, right? And I think that's just inexperience and not getting the brush really horizontal. The other thing I'm noticing is I really need heavy pigmented paints to get the effects, and I'm not getting that in these light washes. Okay, I think this is actually going in a better direction, and what I'm learning is pigment, but I think I'm going to let that dry so I can add some texture into it. So I did a quick swash of green and then added kind of a shadow, and now it's talking about spattering, which you want to practice before you actually do it, because that was crap. But okay, spattering a little there, and some lighter green, maybe a little more vibrant on the other side. Again, I'm going to practice before I add a few shadows so that we actually accentuate the light and dark, and call it good, I guess. So to show you what I'm finding is, you know, the person who's been doing this for 20 years obviously makes it look very easy. That makes sense. It's not a criticism. The page needs to be completely dry to use this technique, which wasn't made clear in the video. Again, not a criticism. It's because of my level of inexperience. I get it. again, I think it's a little too wet. It's too wet and too not vibrant enough. So, better splatter. I think two colors are too much going on. Interesting, right? I like some of the things happening in here. It's okay. I might try a smaller one right here and just be quiet and see what happens. Okay, so as you can see off camera, I did another version. So I think it's nice how this is working. I think the tree trunk, it's a thing of practice. Too many branches in general, I think is what I'm doing. Splatter is way too much. Splatter is about right here. This actually has a nice texture to it. This one's getting there. The pigments aren't quite bright enough. If I'm learning anything from this, it's to keep your pigments light. The other thing, let's see if I can hold this down because it's trying to lift. I don't want the page to lift. I want flat. Is what wasn't mentioned was if you're going to do this technique, it's very light. And you don't want to go over anywhere you've already gone over, right? You have to have a bunch of pigment. As soon as you go over somewhere, you can see it starts to get muddy, right? So pigment, super light, so you only pick up. And obviously somebody who's been doing this for a long time can do it much faster than I can. I can almost just be like, oh, okay. That didn't work, right? So that's for me the lesson, is really light. And drier on pigment. If you notice that just got really sloppy, it's called dry brush for a reason. And it could also be, this is a cold press, so it has a texture, but it's not a rough paper. Now I almost wonder if I want to play with that. So I've gotten this dried out. I think it should have been done reverse, like the video shows, meaning the trunk first and then the leaves, because the leaves are fading behind. So if I let that dry, add more to it, maybe. Let's try that. Right, so I'm going to go into another one. My critique is it's not as easy as he makes it look in the video. That's to be given. But I really like sort of the looseness of it. You have to watch what you do for the trunk of the tree. That's more believable. The pigment in the leaves is not doing what I want it to do. It's not strong enough. So stronger mixes. This leaves are actually okay. There's too much going on with the tree, I think. This is much simpler and it's actually much more effective. So 1, 2, 3, 4, starting to get somewhere that's actually okay. And I did look back for a second. And part of the reason I'm getting less texture than the video is I'm on a cold press paper, which has a tooth to it, but the person in the video is using a rough paper, which obviously has more of a tooth. So that's part of it as well. And too much lack of water control, better water control. And the other piece in the video that I'm realizing is dry between all the steps. At least that's what I'm seeing. All right, let's go on to another one. So we're trying another one. A piece of natural sponge. So I'm going to dip it in paint and then pat it on the paper. Trying to keep the bottom flat and give the general shape of a tree. Okay, and go into darker and add a shadow side. And take a fine point and just add some details. Let that dry. Again, I got fooled, right? Meaning dry between every layer, everything you do. Otherwise, you don't get the distinct look of leaves. Okay, so if I'm gonna not be fooled, I'm gonna let it dry a little more. Take the dark mix and even let some of it get a little darker. And just add in, it's actually the wrong brush. Let's get a brush with a little more to it. So I can just adding in some more shadows down on the bottom. And over to this side. Okay. Don't overwork it. Alright, so now wet wash of brown. Get back the end of my brush. Good. Get myself a fairly strong green, not too wet. Right. It's nice how the two of them are bleeding together. Add in a little dark for a shadow. Now I'm going to cover up where I don't want it to go. Okay, let me let that dry, see where it goes. So it's mostly dry, not completely, but I'm just adding a few details. A couple of moments where some branches show out past the leaves. Work the bottom a little more to get shadow. And at that point, I'm leaving it alone and saying that's pretty good. Of the two, that I think was more satisfying. Okay. Okay, so we're trying another spring tree. So start with a yellowish green, wet, and just some of that dry brush technique. It's a little too wet. And then mix in some darker green. Okay, that wasn't really dark enough to give me the contrast I wanted. So I want to add some more into there. Not weaken this too much. I've got might be a little too much, so I'm going to lift some of this out. Okay. We put a trunk in. That's not anywhere near wet enough. Grab our brush. Actually, put that up, right up into the wash. Let it sort of bleed. There we go. We want it wet enough to move some of this up into the... While it's still wet, spatter in some paint. Pick up my little problems. And I'm going to add a little more brown in again because I don't feel like the trunk is anywhere near strong enough. I'm going to let that dry out. Just putting in a shadow. I'll let that dry. Now that that's dried, I'm going to add... I think this is okay. I'm going to take a minute and I got to try this again. So I'm going to take a minute, make up some more wash, come back and try to do it again. Hopefully I've got a little darker washes so I can work this a little better. While that's still wet, let's spatter in some of the greens. Okay, let that dry. And finally add in a little bit of spatter after it's dried out. And leave it at that. Let's see how that comes out. So, my initial own personal critique. This is better for shadow. It's probably a little too much. It's strong, but the wrong color. I feel like the technique for this tree canopy is much better. It might have been a little extra wet. So I've got to get, I think what I'm seeing in general is that I'm using wet technique versus dry. So I got to try drying it out. All right, let's try that again. I did forget the last bit. And I'm seeing a few last bits that I can do. Because I don't think the trunk is quite what I want it to be. Now I have a chance to shape it a little bit better. Well, those last little details really helped, I think. Yeah. Actually came out pretty good. So maybe I'll do one more. So I'm going to try one more. Unfortunately my light green wash rolled into the rest of the palette, but okay. But I have my light green, my darker green, and my brown here. And I'm trying to get more pigment without it getting too wet. Right? I think me dabbing like this is a pretty good indicator that the mix is too wet and not a strong enough wash. And I'm going to let that actually partially dry before I put in any shadow. So I'll be back. So this is dry now, and I just feel like it washed out well, it's not completely dry, I can already see that, but I feel like it washed out the trunk too much. Okay. Now I'm going to let that dry. I think I should leave that. So for sure you can see first, second, third.
It's a technique that is going to require some practice.
Alright, so there's a technique that's described when you see the link, if you go there, for grass. And it's interesting. It uses what was called a manky brush. So I have a really cheap brush that I kind of tore into with the scissors, and we'll just go to it. I'm going to do it around one of the trees because why not? The grass already kind of is not great, so. You can see everything's still very wet on wet, which is great. That's what I want. Now I've gone away from the manky brush, quote unquote, so I have a little more control. Pull some shadowy stuff in here. It's still wet. And actually add some little moments. And a little splatter. Let's use a smaller brush. He actually finished it off with a little bit of salt, since everything's still wet. Okay, I'm going to try that on a couple of the other ones. Alright, so that's alright. It's coming out. So now an autumn tree. So back to the sponge. And flick in some darker tones for the shadow side. Take the brush, dab in some more. It's still wet in here. More as in darker. Right. I actually want to use a little of the yellow, the lighter, shape a little over here. That isn't just the sponge. Smaller brush. It's still a tad too wet. So hang on a minute. Alright, I'm going to move on, but it's still a little wet. Okay, let's see if I can actually make this work. Well, we're definitely going to have to pick that up. Alright, so And now let's get more paint than that. And just add a little more detail in. Twigs coming out. Good. And of course, find the time to splatter a little bit on here. Clean up the pieces I don't want. All right. Okay, so we're into winter trees now. Then we're talking about just a Douglas fir or a pine tree. Give it a go. So a line straight down. And now we're painting in okay. Pull out, dry off the brush, pull out some of these colors to give it some highlights. And find a darker wash on the other side. Okay.
Let that dry.
I forgot one detail before you let it dry. Pull out some little details, pieces. It might be too late on this side on the left. Whoops. But they really add to it, so it's well worth cheating like I'm doing right now.
Now we let it dry.
So if I want to do something in the background, I've used a much bluer and lighter wash, but I'm going to be doing the same thing. So I went to a lighter or smaller brush. Did not want that, meaning I don't want to blend with the, basically I'm just doing a wash of snow
Putting some shadows. Make sure the base of the trees are a little darker. Good.